a special spooky edition of Get Free in light of, or maybe I should say in dark of, Halloween. And to unmask this darkness, I've got the ultimate guide, Dyer, author of Esoteric Hollywood, bloodline researcher, geopolitical occult expert. He's seen the symbols in the shadows from Hollywood rituals to global power plays, and he's here bringing the light. Jay, thank you so much for helping me tackle this subject.
Thank you. Glad to be here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. One thing I have noticed in just the light research prior to this interview on Halloween, I mean, obviously it is Halloween week, and just on the light research I've done, it's a very polarizing subject when it comes to the Christian's role in Halloween. I noticed this tweet, or X, I should say, from Jack Posobiec, and he, if we could pull that post up, he says, All Hallows Eve, now Halloween, began as a Christian vigil before All Saints Day to honor the martyrs who died for the faith. The name comes from hallowed, meaning holy, and Eve, the night before the feast. Halloween is Christian. So pretty bold statement there. What do you make of his post?
Well, I'm not Roman Catholic, but as Orthodox, we have the same feast. It's just it's near Pentecost in the Orthodox Church, so it's not really the same time frame. But the history of the Church did engage in a degree of Christianizing elements of the local cultures that were not necessarily idolatrous. One thing I think that's helpful to distinguish in this this conversation, excuse me, is the distinction between paganism and idolatry. So we should all disagree with whatever is idolatrous, but there are elements of pagan cultures and traditions that can be baptized and Christianized. For example, we use the days of the week that are pagan names. We use the days of the month, or the months. January is after the god Janus. So those things that are harmless can be Christianized, and the Church has always done that. But that's different than adopting something explicitly occultic or in some way idolatrous.
Interesting. Just from my own personal experience, I grew up where we trick-or-treated. It was an opportunity to get some free candy. We usually dressed as Bible characters, or, silly things. We were not allowed to watch the horror movies or celebrate anything violent. But yeah, I mean, I think about this every year and wondering, well, is it wrong? But there is the other extreme. So we heard from Jack Posobiec, oh, it's Christian. But then I want to play a quick TikTok, I think it is, of someone who talking about just how satanic it is. So let's watch that.
I just learned something terrifying about Halloween, and it's giving me absolute goosebumps. Did you know that Halloween has nothing to do with trick-or-treating, candy, or dressing up in cute costumes? Its origins are so dark, it's creeping me out. It all started 2,000 years ago. On October 31st, the gates of the evil spirit world was opened. It was literally nicknamed the Devil's Birthday, and they would offer a human blood sacrifice just to please the evil spirits. They would dress up in dead animal skin and wear animal skulls to disguise themselves as the Walking Dead. And this is where the costume tradition comes from. Then they would go door knocking, demanding food. And if the owners refused, their home would be cursed. And that's where trick-or-treating comes from. In 1980, big corporations rebranded this satanic ritual into a multi-billion-dollar industry, selling us costumes and candy. Most people have no idea they're celebrating the Devil's Birthday. Sorry, but I'm boycotting Halloween this year. Why are we celebrating a satanic ritual? What do you?
Okay, so that's obviously the other extreme view. Would you say that the view is just personal choice, somewhere in the middle? I don't even would you even say that what she said was all accurate?
No, I mean, she's actually a paid Islamic influencer. She gets paid to push Islam. I'm pretty sure that's Lily, what's her face, but yeah, she's pretty well known for that. And a lot of the takes that they have are pretty kind of insane. And by the way, Islam is full of Gnostic and pagan influences as well. But aside from that issue, it's not the Devil's Birthday. There are Druidic, Celtic, origins of this celebration of the opening of the gates of hell or Hades or death or whatever. But what happened was when Christianity was permeating the Western Empire, and particularly going to the British Isles and whatnot, they noticed that people would celebrate these things that were overtly idolatrous, and in that sense, bad paganism. And so what would often happen is they would say, all right, what elements of this can we say relate in some way to the Christian faith? So if you're going to focus on things that relate to death, the church said, why don't we focus on the death of Christian martyrs? And that's why it's called All Saints Day. So the origin of it really, in that sense, is Christian, and focusing away from death and all of that onto something holy and something good. So, there's a great a friend of mine who's a famous guy on Orthodox, or a priest on YouTube now, Father Moses McPherson, and he did a really good discussion on the Orthodox perspective of Halloween. And it's really, you want to avoid participating in overtly occult things, but even wearing a costume or something like that, or asking for candy, is innocuous. Although, I mean, the candy is pretty much toxic. I wouldn't engage in that. But yeah, I mean, I haven't celebrated Halloween since I was a kid. But I don't think we don't want to celebrate, the things that are overtly wicked, or participate in seances, or, Ouija board or whatever. That kind of stuff would obviously be not appropriate for a Christian. But I don't even think, like you said, dressing up in a costume is that big of a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is about the approach. But I want to pause here because I know that you are really passionate about or being an Orthodox Christian, and I want to get a little. We could probably do a whole show on that, but I just want to touch upon that because I am intrigued. I grew up evangelical Christian, Protestant, if you will.
Me too.
I recently did a podcast with the author of a book that started as an atheist and was actually won over by the extra books, if you will, in the Catholic books. And he said, if you apply the same evidence as, say, Lee Strobel did to the Bible and Jesus to these extra books, that it only strengthens the resurrection story, the death and resurrection story. And so he was coming from more of the Catholic view. And so really, I'm kind of just like, well, what is Orthodox Christianity? There's so many things here.
Well, we do. I don't know who that person is, but we do have all those same extra books that were removed by Luther and the Reformers because they were seen to be in conflict with the Reformation distinctives. So Orthodox Christianity is, we believe, the faith of the universal Christian empire, the first 1,000 years of Christianity. We were previously in union with the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope, for those first 1,000 years, and there was a schism in 1054. Officially, it had been kind of brewing for a few centuries before that between the patriarchs of the East, the Church of the East, and the papacy, the patriarch of the West. So that famous schism happened in 1054, and the Orthodox Church has been, since 1054, out of communion and separate from the Roman Catholic Church. And so we are the Orthodox Catholic Church, which is basically the rest of non-Protestant Christianity. So, we look to the first 7/8 ecumenical councils that occurred in the first millennium. That's kind of our theological dogmatic teachings. This would be things like the Nicene Creed. It would be, things like the teaching of the Council of Chalcedon. And as you mentioned with the guy that you were talking about, we also have those same books. They're called the deuterocanonical books, or the secondary canon. That's part of our scriptures as well. I don't know what he was referring to, but he might be referring to the fact that there's actually many prophecies of Christ in some of those texts, like the Book of Wisdom, for example. Early on in Wisdom, there's things that the early church fathers, and even St. Paul himself, references these deuterocanonical texts to point to Christ. So it's sort of additional evidence that Jesus was predicted in the Old Testament text. And the Bible that the apostles use, for the most part, is called the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Jewish Old Testament, and all the Septuagint copies have the deuterocanonical text as part of it. That's why Paul many times alludes to, and cites the deuterocanonical texts, such as a Sirach or the books of Maccabees, etc. For example, Hebrews and Hebrews 11, when it refers to the martyrs, it's directly referencing what happens in the book of Maccabees. So all of those books are very important for the Orthodox Church, and they're part of our heritage and our reading. So we, in contrast to Protestantism, we have a lot of what you might call Catholic elements. If you're a Protestant, you're not familiar with the Orthodox Church. We have bishops. We have a priesthood. We believe that is the Melchizedekian priesthood that was predicted all the way back in Genesis and Psalm 110. And if you read the early church fathers in the first, second, third centuries, right after the apostles, you'll find that they teach all the same things that we do, that the Christ is really present in the Eucharist, that baptism really regenerates, that there is a succession of bishops. All of that is distinctive to the Orthodox Church, but we're not Roman Catholic. We don't believe in the papacy. We don't believe in indulgences and purgatory and all these sort of Roman Catholic innovations and excesses.
I wasn't really prepared to talk about that.
That's fine. Yeah.
Interesting. But no, while you were talking, I just wanted to mention that the author is Matthew Mark McWhorter, and the book is Canon Crossfire. Just for anyone listening that it wants to know what I'm referring to, I had a whole separate show on that. But yeah, I find it all fascending.
Well, we can talk about whatever you want, Christy. I'll talk about anything. I don't care.
Yes. So, I mean, very much love doing the deep dive into Enoch, and I accept that, but like I'm still on a road to this orthodoxy, I guess you could say. I even with him, I said any hesitancy I have with Catholicism comes from sticking points like having what I see as intermediary, like the Pope, and calling someone else father when I know it can go straight to Jesus. Those are my hangups. I don't know how that falls with Orthodox Christian. At what point? Because in reading your bio, it says you went from Protestant to Catholic to now you settled on Orthodoxy. What about Catholicism turned you away?
Well, like you, I was raised Protestant, so I had a lot of the same kind of hang-ups back in 2001 or 2 or 3. And when I started reading the Church Fathers, I just sort of assumed that, well, this is pagan innovations and accretions that kind of got into the teaching of the church. But then I started realizing, well, actually, they tend to have pretty good biblical arguments for even things like the intercession of the saints. If you read Revelation 5 through 9, you'll notice that when John sees into heaven, he sees a heavenly worship service. And you'll notice he sees that there's saints under the altar in heaven praying for the saints on earth and offering their prayers up like incense. There's another angel that offers the incense to God, which is said to be the prayers of the saints. So angels and saints in heaven are busy, engaged in praying for us. So we don't see it as not going to Jesus, but just like if you ask your mom to pray for you, that doesn't mean that you're not going to Jesus. It just simply means that the prayer of a righteous man availeth much, I think, as James says. So likewise, if you look at the book of Amos, Amos intercedes for Israel, and God says to Amos, had you not interceded, I would have destroyed Israel, but you interceded, and so I choose not to. So we simply believe that there's a communion of saints that Hebrews 11 talks about, that we share not just with the living church or the church militant, but also with those who have gone on. So as Jesus says, they who die in God do not die, but they live to God. So they're alive, they're not dead. And even the Jews, the ancient Jews, had the same idea and the same belief and practice that the saints and the holy men, the righteous men, the prophets could intercede and pray for us because they are in the presence of God, loving and praying for us. So we don't see it as it's not contacting the dead. We're not trying to get occult information. We believe that the book of Revelation actually is a liturgical worship service. And so I'd recommend to you or anybody interested, my friend made a good documentary. It's on the YouTube channel called Orthodox Shahada. It's called Christian Worship in the Old Testament. And you'll notice that the worship service that the Orthodox Church does throughout the entire Roman Empire, going all the way back to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, is pretty much the synthesis of the temple service of the Old Testament and the synagogue services. So when the apostles crafted liturgical worship for the church, they didn't make it up out of nowhere. They actually took the principles of the temple liturgy and the synagogue liturgy system and put them into ancient Christian liturgical rituals. And that's why the church fathers in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century all teach this same kind of ordered liturgical worship.
Interesting. Very, very fascinating. Definitely will look more into that. I do know that like someone like my husband, he's very leery of anything that has any kind of ritual or elders or anything like that, because he actually grew up Mormon. So he would probably be a little bit more cautious than me in at least looking into it. But it's all
Well, I
it's
debate
all
all the Mormons, by the way, so we're not at all pro-Mormon. So
yeah. I'm just saying that since he was kind of like forced into that as a
right,
kid, and he's just a little bit leery now
weird,
of like
sure.
anything that has like rituals or elders or anything like that. But yeah, we're fascinated by it all. We're huge Chuck Missler. We sit there and listen to Chuck Missler. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but Chuck Missler presentations all the time. All right, getting back to Halloween, and we're talking kind of like on the extreme, and I think we're in agreement that, well, if you're approaching it lighthearted, you're not participating in the occult, then perhaps that's okay for you if you choose that. But then I did see a whole clip of an ex-Satanist his warning against Halloween. So let's watch that and talk about that on the other side.
Therefore, a very easy way to desensitize children to things like death and demons and gargoyles and you name it is something like Halloween. And then furthermore, if we think of a neighborhood or an area where there is a few homes that is celebrating Halloween, that whole perimeter becomes a satanic ritual by definition. So it is like a hot spot for demonic activity, and you are opening doors to the dark side of the spirit world when you are doing those things and engaging in those celebrations.
So there you go. He's saying it's basically opening a door, opening a window to demonic activity. I'm not even sure where you stand on demonic activity and its prevalence or how you feel about that. So where do you stand there?
I think there's some truth in what he's saying. Obviously, the satanic calendar does exist. They have holy days, and they do, honor solstices, and they think that Samhain or Samhain or whatever is important to them. But I mean, for Orthodox Christians, we don't think that has any power over us. We believe that the cross is already triumphant over the power of Satan. Not that there's not demons and demonic activity. We believe in exorcism. Everybody who's baptized actually has to undergo an exorcism, part of the baptism service of joining the Orthodox Church. So,
Wow.
yeah, we have exorcists as well. So we definitely believe in demonic activity. But I think for the Orthodox Church, it's a little less sensational than that. Not that there aren't satanic ritual abuse cults. I've written books on that, so I'm aware of it. But the real battle with satanic elements is our own passions and our own desires to move us away from the virtues towards vice. So that's the real warfare that we usually engage in. But there are cults and there are these activities and there are satanic, occult phenomena that occur. But I don't think we have to be scared or worried about it. And the celebration, as I said, of the martyrs and of all saints is not the celebration of Halloween. There's two different things. So even for us, they're on different days. So no, I wouldn't celebrate Samhain. But like Paul says, you read Corinthians, Paul says that when you go to the meat market and there's meat offered to idols, is it a thing? Does that do anything? No. But the only thing that matters here is if it might offend somebody else's conscience. So I've had some friends over that, it was trampling on their conscience to go to a Halloween party and they really felt bad about it. I wouldn't do it for the sake of my brother, as Paul says. But is Halloween a thing? Is it anything? Paul says no.
And also in thinking about this, growing up, I remember my mom was, I guess that's where I got it from. She was super into like digging deep on all kinds of, whether you want to call them conspiracy theories or spiritual warfare. She always had on the radio, she would listen to Bob Larson. I don't know if you remember who that was, but it was an era of like what we would call the satanic panic. I'm showing my age here, 80s, 90s. There was this satanic panic. And so I grew up in and around Toledo. She's like, there's a huge coven here where we live. And I just remember her freaking out about all these things and having Bob Larson on the radio. He's doing exorcisms. It was wild. So I was very aware of this other element, this spiritual element, demons, all of that growing up, but almost like on a hysterical level. now I compare that with being an adult and what we see happening now. We see evil on display, no question, but it's not almost this like cartoon of Satan, if you will.
Yeah.
Like I think it is more subtle, if you will.
Yeah.
We went from satanic panic and exorcisms and witches and all of this to now there's like witch talk on TikTok, and that's more about as I understand it, we're talking about like healing and stuff like that. So what do you think about like the era we're in? Is the occult very as much alive as it was in, say, the 80s and 90s? It just looks differently, or what's your observation there?
No, I think it's exploding, and I think that was by design. In fact, I was just on with Alex, and we did a pretty deep dive on Changing Images of Man, which was a graduate level textbook for the elite bureaucracy governmental class. And the textbook actually describes getting and promoting other elites into these occult practices. So it's a real thing. This book talks about channeling, contacting entities, and all that stuff. Again, this is an elite textbook, so it is real. There's also a lot of con men and frauds and scammers in that whole domain as well. So I think it's a mix of all these things. I think the satanic panic, which I've studied pretty in depth, there was some truth to it. And there were satanic cults and movements. There were real cases of ritual abuse. You could look at somebody like Bobby Bordello. You could look at the cases in Chicago. Some of the serial killers were explicitly involved in the occult at that time, but the media would play that down and just focus on the gruesome aspects of it. But at the same time, you had these people who would sort of capitalize on that. You know, Geraldo does his sort of sensationalist satanic panic episodes, and then Oprah did some, and Sally Jesse Raphael, all those 80s, you know, wine mom afternoon yapping fests for the ladies, all of that sort of capitalized on that sensationalism and hype. And it kind of blew it out of proportion and made it look cartoonish, which I think worked to actually sort of deflect from the real stuff that was going on with the Finders and the McMartin case. If you look into that, Franklin Cover Up, which my publisher published Nick Bryant's book on that. And so, yeah, I mean, in fact, in Esoteric Hollywood 3, my new book that's just now come out, I actually cover some of those themes that have popped up in modern film. And to fast forward to today, I think that's intentionally being promoted. They said back in 1982 they would promote all that stuff to usher in a new era, a new aeon, an aeon of kind of new age philosophy and thought, which is ultimately kind of satanic if you get to the root of it with Blavatsky and Crowley and all those figures. So, you know, there have been a lot more revelations about networks of satanic ritual abuse, especially in the last few years. So I think it's definitely exploding. It does tie into the millennial and Gen Z obsessions with the rise of witchcraft. My wife and I, we're going to be doing some podcasts on Wicca and witchcraft pretty soon on my channel. You mentioned TikTok or witch talk, because not many people talk about this. I've done 2 streams kind of just making fun of witch talk. So I do a lot of live streams where we react to those clips, but that's all promoted by design. And it's part of what they said would be to give a new paradigm, a new worldview when they've destroyed Christianity by design to the West, to make it more amenable to the technocracy.
Interesting. In your Esoteric Hollywood books, you're ripping apart occult symbols and movies. I know you talked about The Craft, or I believe you talked about The Craft, or like Hocus Pocus type movies. What do you see? I don't know. Maybe you can give us tease in Esoteric 3. What do you see as promoting subtly, or I guess directly, the occult and this other side in current day?
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that's, you know, a good critique sometimes, and then there's stuff that's like promoting it quite a bit, so that you get all the above. But I actually started the book with some of the more popular blockbusters, Marvel type stuff, and so you know, I'm not trying to shy away from the satanic stuff, but we oftentimes overlook the more subtle, you know, gender propaganda that exists in a lot of movies that I know, you know, you're probably aware of all that, but so I worked through a lot of the Marvel films in the first 75 pages, and how comic books were very instrumental in social engineering and getting people to accept, you know, rainbow lifestyles and all of that, especially targeted at the youth, which is really insidious. In the next section, I moved into what I call the dark Gnostic goddess savior archetype. And this is really to put the dark female heroine in the place of the former, you know, masculine action hero. Now that's been replaced with all, women superstar badasses who can, basically just kick everybody's butt. Even if they're like 14-year-old girls, movies like Kick Ass and so forth, right? Which doesn't make any sense, but that's done on purpose to emasculate and demasculinize and then promote, females into the role of masculinity through the manipulation of symbols and images and archetypes. And that's really what this book is about, is retooling archetypes and patterns in pop culture and music and everything to, again, flip and invert what we know of as sort of the natural order. I move into talking about dystopian films. I talk about weird kind of occult B movies and Satanism in Hollywood. A lot of the different actors and actresses who, have been kind of involved in that stuff. I talk about trauma and how Hollywood presents kind of traumatic mind control in films. We go through tons of horror films to discuss this. And then I end the book talking about Hollywood Antichrist Apocalypse. And I called it that because Hollywood's actually kind of at the end of an era. It's kind of at the end of its age because it served its purpose to deracinate and toxify our culture. And so now they're kind of moving on to streaming and video games and AI or whatever. So Hollywood served its purpose, but it's very important, I think, to understand, what they were pushing and what the subtext and sub-themes of the films were. For example, a lot of people don't know that many A-listers were spies and worked for intelligence agencies. So they weren't just involved in cults and the occult. Many of them actually were also involved in, being spies for the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA, or they were working for the FBI or whatever. And so, I've got like whole chapters just talking about that kind of stuff. So, it's a tour de force, right? It's 3 volumes. It's a trilogy. It's over 1,000 pages of movie analysis at a very readable but sophisticated level.
You've done such extensive research, not only in the Hollywood angles and all of that, but geopolitically. What caused this? What caused you to be you, Jay? Was there like a light switch or something that made you just want to deep dive, or have you always been like that?
Well, my mom was a librarian and a editor, so she edited for Harcourt Brace for many years, and so she always promoted reading ever since I was a very little guy. So there's always books around, and she was a big believer in that, and I think that was a big part of it. But when I was in high school, I was really into theater and acting and film and doing comedy and all that kind of stuff. So I had a fascination with movies and Hollywood. And when I went to grad school, I studied that in terms of like psychological warfare and how films are used as propaganda. So I was able to kind of link all those things into undergraduate and graduate research. And so that I didn't end up being a professor. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I was told, if you're a straight white male, you're pretty much not welcomed in academia anyway. So I decided to just go kind of make my own way. And then that led to, writing a blog for many years. That became a book. That became a TV show, Hollywood Decoded Season 1, which you can still watch over at Gaia TV. And then, just combining all these things of hosting, Alex Jones for the last 5 years. And then now writing comedy for the Sam Hyde Show. We've basically finished an entire season of a full production comedy show. So you can check that out on YouTube as well. So yeah, it's a weird, wild snowball adventure that I've rolled into.
Well, it's very inspiring. I always get inspired when I talk to people like you and others that have like done extreme deep dives. I'm kind of new to all this. I've always been fascinated by really digging into all things theology and philosophy. And I really want to dig more into history. I'm sad that I wasn't into history more in high school and college. I just hated memorizing.
I wasn't in high school. It wasn't until college. Yeah, I got into it later in life as well, but it's never too late.
Yeah. Yes. It's definitely never too late to learn. And I really enjoy learning, especially when you're not forced to learn anymore. It makes it so much more fun. So I wanted to hit this other, I know that you have done some research on bloodline families, as it relates to geopolitics and things like that. When you just like dip your toe in. Of course, everything that you're going to read says, oh, it's just all conspiracy theories. The Rothschild had any occult element. It's been debunked. Those are the first things that come up. What have you discovered, if any, ties to the occult and some of these first families, if you will?
Well, if you take, for example, intelligence agencies, they kind of emerge out of the networks of the wealthy and the powerful. So if you go back to the British Empire, Queen Elizabeth, for example, she had as her number one spy the court magus magician John Dee. And so when he would sign his letters or his communiques to her, he would sign it with a 00 and a 7. And that's where we get 007 from. So I mean, again, he created an entire magical language called Enochian magic, because he was a scryer and a channeler and all this kind of stuff. So the world of spycraft and the world of the power elite has always overlapped with the occult. And like you said, with Bloodlines as well, because, the British throne and these characters, they've always been very interested in genetic lineage. We get, genetics research out of Malthusianism and sort of the popular famous people of the British Empire, the Galtons, the Wedgwoods, the Huxleys. They all were obsessed with and are still obsessed with kind of, genetic study and research and bloodlines. And partly because there's something true to that. I mean, we do have genetic memories that come to us from our ancestors, and that's part of our heritage. But you can also turn it into kind of a pseudo religion and kind of worship it. And, you see that with, Hitlerian type movements where they sort of worship blood and soil. You see that with, even within Zionism or Judaism, or as you mentioned, the Rothschilds. I think you can have a similar situation where they sort of worship their lineage and their bloodlines as well. And an example of this is one of the global elite books that we cover is Charles Galton Darwin's book, The Next Million Years. There's multiple chapters in there where he talks about it's the power that's in the bloodlines that leads people to become the dynasties or the rulers. There's literally an entire chapter on that. And he says that in the future, the technocracy, the elites will utilize that bloodline lineage to sort of suppress the masses, depopulate them, and have dominance in the technocracy. It's called Next Million Years. It's a book I covered, I think, about 10 years ago on my channel. So yeah, that's very real. It does come up. And again, that's because, the scriptures say that life is in the blood. Leviticus says that. And that for us as Orthodox is telling us that the life that you need, the divine life, is in Christ's blood. So there's a parallel here between bloodlines, Christ's bloodline. He's the fulfillment, obviously, of the messianic bloodline, going back to Adam, to Abraham, to David, right, all the way up to his birth. And so, in the Orthodox Church, we see that as the way to combat this demonic version of blood sacrifice and the occult or whatever, is the participation in the life of Christ and his flesh and blood.
Interesting. As long as we're talking about royals or bloodlines and things like that. As I was looking into things, your wife wrote a couple really cool books on Hollywood, essentially, and Katy Perry is one featured in that one of those books as. I've read a little bit about her. From what I've read about Katy Perry, apparently she was supposedly started as a Christian and then sold her soul to the devil. And it's just pretty wild now seeing that she's suddenly dating Justin Trudeau. So I'm like, interesting. So if she sold her soul to the devil and now she's with this royal, if you will, a former leader, just didn't know if you had any thoughts on that since it's current.
Well, I mean, it does speak to that, networking that they do at that level where they kind of, cross-pollinate and, that I don't know, I haven't looked deeply into Justin Trudeau himself, but I wouldn't be surprised if any of these government leaders turned out to be actual Satanists. I think many of them are covertly, some of them overtly. Katy Perry is interesting because she began as this sort of evangelical, sort of Christianish singer. Her first album is actually a Christian album, and you can see her singing on TBN, right, which is obviously sus, but she seems to have been some kind of Christian-ish person. And then her dad is this mega church pastor, and he had these weird connections with Tim Leary and LSD type stuff that Tim Leary was involved in. So there's a lot of weird background to Katy Perry, but yeah, you should have my wife on because she knows all about these pop stars and their whole like lineage, and she would be perfect for that. But I think it's par for the course for elite networking and, probably bloodline type connections.
So let's go back to something you said before that I found intriguing. You said before that there should be an exorcism before baptism, unless I misheard you. I got baptized when I was 14. I was not exorcised before my baptism. So tell me what you meant by that and where that comes from.
I don't mean like the Hollywood idea of like, a Roman Catholic priest comes in and like your head turns and you vomit pea soup everywhere. But we believe that, because of original sin, everybody who's born is kind of de facto not in the family of God. And so you might not be an explicit Satanist, but you're kind of influenced by the spirit of the world before you come into the church. And so in the Orthodox practice, it's a part of the baptismal service, which includes exorcism prayers. So it's not an exorcisms like in the movies, but there are explicit exorcism prayers, and you actually have to spit outside the door of the church you spit at the devil in the world and you reject him, and then you turn to the church, and then you're baptized in the church. So it's a symbolic, the baptism inside the church is symbolic, but you are actually praying the exorcism prayers.
Interesting. Where do you stand on exorcism today? Because again, I feel like that is the acknowledgement of demons as a real thing, of hell as a real thing, is not in vogue right now. We have a lot of these
there's an Orthodox
churches that never talk about this kind of stuff, but it is very real. I know, like Russ Dizdar was all about addressing generational sin and acknowledging the spiritual warfare end of things, but it doesn't seem to be mainstream.
Yeah, there's a pretty prominent Orthodox priest named Father George Aquaro, and he's an Orthodox exorcist. So we do have that. It does exist. But it's a little different than the way the Roman Catholic Church approaches it. We don't have a specific ritual or like a person who does it, right? Like in the Roman Church, there's like exorcists in the Rome or whatever. For the Orthodox, any priest can do an exorcism or do those prayers or have that kind of a situation that they could handle if they choose to, and perhaps even laity as well. So we don't restrict that to some special dude in Rome.
Interesting. I think it should be acknowledged more, though, this spiritual element things.
Sure.
Because there's just some things I think that a lot of people get converted to acknowledgement of God when they're faced with evil. And we're definitely seeing a lot of evil. I don't know where you stand on the Charlie Kirk assassination. There's all kinds of things going on about that, but it did seem to, again, make people stop and be like, wow, that is not something I wanted to see on my timeline over and over again. I think it served as a way for people to be faced with how quickly their life can end, quite simply, and is potentially leading to some revival there. But yeah, I think some people, when they see evil, unexplainable evil like that, it's like, oh, okay, well, this must be up against something, right?
Yeah, I think I had the same basic analysis that you did, that we're realizing that the left isn't, interested in civil discourse and debate, right? And even if the official story is not true, I have my questions about it. I don't know exactly what went down, but even if it wasn't, the sort of trans adjacent dude that did it, we've seen many leftists get extremely violent, call for violence over and over and over in the last 10 years, really going back to 2016, when people were trying to have debates on campuses, and you already had Antifa basically hitting people in the head with bike locks back then. That's when we started to notice, okay, the left is actually getting super violent. They're not rational, and they don't care about debating you and listening to the issues anymore. So they're motivated, I think, by this demonic spirit. Scripture says that revolution or rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, right? So it's like you don't really stay neutral, right? Like if you're vibed in with evil, you'll get more and more and more and more evil over time. And if you're moving the direction of good, you're going to get better and better, hopefully by God's grace over time, right? So people move in those directions. They don't typically stay neutral. And the left has definitely gotten more and more openly satanic and demonic. And I think you're absolutely right that that is waking people up. But I'm also leery of a lot of the establishment appointed Christian options that they'll give, because a lot of those are going to be fake and gay.
I agree. I agree with you on that one. I want to make sure that we hit, since we have touched upon your passion for Orthodoxy. I wanted to pull up your video. Let's play that video real quick about the conference.
What is the relationship between reason and revelation, between philosophy and faith? For the Orthodox Church, the answer is clear. Christianity was not born in the lecture halls of Greek philosophers, but in the encounter with the living God. Yet the Church did not ignore philosophy. She baptized it using the language of reason to proclaim truths that reason alone could never reach. So, what is the Orthodox view of philosophy? What role does human reason play in the life of faith? Does Orthodoxy believe in natural theology? And what is the difference between knowledge about God and knowing Him? Join us for an unforgettable conference exploring these timeless questions and encounter the answer, not just in words, but in worship, in truth, in the experience of the Holy Trinity. Come and discover the true faith, the faith that established the universe.
All right, last I looked, there was very limited number of tickets available. Where do you stand right now?
I think there's about 10 left.
Wow. Okay.
We tore down a wall. Our church tripled in size, so we actually have more space for the extra tickets, and they just did that. So there's still a few spots open.
That's incredible. You said that you were raised Protestant, right?
Yeah, I was raised Baptist.
Oh, Baptist. What do your parents think about this this conversion?
I mean, they've seen me kind of go on a long journey, so I think my mom is very supportive. I mean, she's always been kind of right there, whatever I was into. She's open to stuff. My dad is a little less, so he's more of a kind of a grizzled military kind of dude, so he's not really interested in that kind of stuff. But I love him still, and I think he's generally supportive. But they're good parents. They're good about it.
Yeah, I don't know how you couldn't be proud.
They're still Baptist, but they're good about it.
With the fact that you at least take initiative to do so much reading and research, I think that would make any parent proud, you would think. And then another thing that you have coming up right around the corner is it looks like an event for the release of your book, The Scream Queen.
Yeah, it's one of those events. Yeah, this is more of a tongue-in-cheek kind of goofy thing. We do a lot of kind of movie, convention, film festival type stuff, and my wife's going to be involved in competing in a costume challenge against. Do you remember Rhonda Shears from USA Up All Night back in the 90s?
Oh yeah, okay,
No?
now.
Anyway, well, she's at this, so there's a lot of kind of B movie and kind of obscure people that are going to be doing stuff here, and I will be selling and signing Esoteric Hollywood 3 and 1 and 2 if I have them by then.
Yes. Okay. Well, we'll pray for that. All right. Well, any final words on this topic, or just anything on inspiring people to seek the truth? Anything that you live by? Yeah.
I mean, I think I try to either listen to scriptures on audio every day or read scriptures every day, and that's a good. There's so many audio options now that, people are listening to podcasts all the time. I try to tell people that you can listen to scriptures as well, but you can also, check out a local Orthodox church if you're interested. There's a great documentary that I recommend. It's called the Icon documentary. It's 3 hours, but it's worth looking into. But yeah, you can go to jaysanalysis.com. I talk about all kinds of stuff. It's not just the theology, but we do movie reviews and all kinds of crazy stuff. You can check out my YouTube channel, Jay Dyer. You can check out Sam Hyde Show, season 1, which I write. And yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram under my name.
Well, this was really fun, Jay, and we'll have to pick a new topic and dive deep down
Sure.
another hole next time.
Anytime.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.